First, we have Scott Jennings, a partner with RunSwitch PR. He is being interviewed today by my friend Joe Arnold, Vice President of Strategic Communications with the Kentucky Electric Cooperatives. Please welcome them as we learn post-election insights and also learn more about this dynamic political landscape that we're all trying to navigate. So, welcome.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. Scott and I have known each other for a long time. A long time ago, I was an overnight radio host on WHAS radio in Louisville, and Scott, while a U of L student, was my newscaster overnight. So we began broadcasting at that point and have remained good friends ever since. You might know Scott now, of course, more recently in his role as a senior political analyst for CNN. In fact, I don't know if you've announced this yet, Scott. Scott just re-upped another contract with CNN. Congratulations.
Yep. Two more years in the lion's den for me. Yeah.
So you were. So my question is, did they give you like big pieces of meat to put on your eyes after you got beat up all night on CNN as the resident Republican?
Yeah, it's been a good question. It's been I've been doing it for 5.5 years now, and it's been a consequential 5.5 years and a crazy time, right up through the most recent election, which we'll talk about this morning. But I have been out there for some bizarre news events and some crazy conversations, and certainly a changing time in our media landscape as well. So grateful for the job.
Let's talk about election night. You were there. What was that like, first of all? Because obviously most of the country was looking at maybe upwards of 30-seat gain for Republicans. That big red wave they talked about didn't quite materialize. Republicans did still take the House, the Senate. Looks to be 50-50, depending upon Herschel Walker in Georgia. But what was that like out there, and just your overall thoughts?
Yeah, it was an interesting experience on election night. I was sitting out there with David Axelrod, who had obviously advised Obama, and Van Jones, a big Democrat, and a couple of other folks, and everybody was expecting Republicans to win everything. And a couple of hours before the polls closed, they started handing us the exit polls. The sort of the witch's cauldron of politics. And all the exit polls were tracking. Joe Biden wasn't terribly popular, had a 44% approval rating. His policies weren't terribly popular. There was a lot of anger and anxiety about the direction of the country and the economy. But then at the bottom of the page, there was a little section, and it said, among independent voters, who did you vote for in these key races? And in every single race, the independent voters, despite being relatively unsettled about the country, were overwhelmingly voting for the Democrats, especially in the big Senate races. I mean, I thought I was taking crazy pills because I've been doing this for over 20 years now, and I've never lived through an election where the party in power got the votes of the independent voters who were unhappy with the direction of the country. So this manifested itself in Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, and in House races around the country where Republicans just couldn't close the deal with these independent voters. And to me, that's really, Joe, the story of the election, is that Republican gains were quite muted because of the party's inability to close the deal with these independents who, in the past have voted Republican. They're not allergic to voting Republican, but they just couldn't do it this time.
So it seems to me that the two big reasons, the finger pointing the day after or the week after the election are Donald Trump was poison to independents, and the Dobbs decision, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, really drove voter turnout.
Yeah.
Which of those do you think is most to blame, or is it a combination of factors?
In a race this close, and by the way, Republicans are going to win the national popular vote by a point or two when it's all said and done. So it's not a total repudiation of Republicans. But the last round of national polling indicated that the abortion issue had fallen down the list of key concerns for voters. But in the exit polls, it was the second most important issue and scored much higher than the polls had indicated. So it's obvious that it had an impact, particularly in individual jurisdictions. But it was contradictory. In some places, I think it helped Democrats, Michigan, I think certainly. But in other places, pro-life candidates and pro-life governors who had signed fairly strict abortion laws into law won easily. Greg Abbott in Texas, Ron DeSantis in Florida, Brian Kemp in Georgia, Mike DeWine in Ohio. So it was a contradictory message on that particular topic, but obviously clearly impactful in a number of places. What was the other part of your question?
Well, Trump and
Oh,
abortion.
Trump. Yeah, sorry. I was trying to avoid it. Okay, so look, I think it's pretty obvious Trump hurt certain candidates among independent voters. And in fact, there's been an analysis done since the election about the candidates who were most closely linked to Trump, either via endorsement, campaign event, or some tie. And on average, the candidates most closely linked to him did about 5 points worse than the baseline Republican vote. 5 points. Now, there were dozens of House races in the country that Republicans lost by less than 5 points. So, look, in a close race, I mean, I'm sure there's some people in here that have been in some close races. Everything mattered. You know, if you lost, everything was the reason. And if you won, everything was the reason. You could say that about these elections as well. But in this exit polling and this data that's been compiled on election night and beyond, Biden is not popular, but Trump is less popular. And to the extent that all of our politics has become nationalized and viewed through the exact same lens of being a referendum on, A versus B, I think at least among these independent voters, there was a clear overhang.
And you, as a political strategist and a Republican operative, certainly encourage Republicans to keep their eye on the ball on those issues that were the least popular for Democrats. Donald Trump wouldn't let you do that.
Yeah, his presence in some of these races. I'll give you an example. Pennsylvania. If you followed the Pennsylvania Senate race closely, Dr. Oz was the Republican. He got the nomination largely because Trump endorsed him. It was a very, very nasty primary. He got about 33 or 4% of the vote and got the nomination by like 1/10 of a point. But then his general election campaign message was, we need balance and we need moderation in Washington. That was Dr. Oz's main calling card. And the night before the election, Trump went to Pennsylvania against Oz's wishes and had a rally to talk about how Dr. Oz was going to do it his way. And, there are people who were around the Oz campaign who believed that was determinative, that they thought things had been tracking the correct direction. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But that's certainly the feeling of the people who were in the state. And so that's one example where, you can see that, that there's something to it. In Georgia right now, where there's a Senate runoff, the Warnock campaign, he's the Democratic incumbent, is their main ad that they're running statewide in Georgia is, essentially the message is, vote Warnock, stop Trump.
I do want to ask you...
And so you can see that it's obviously in the data somewhere.
I do want to ask you in a moment here about Kentucky statewide races in 2023 and how any of those factors might affect that, but I don't want to leave national politics just yet. I want to ask you about, first of all, the consequences of this. No, first of all, let's talk about Leader McConnell.
Yeah.
Reelected. There was some fractiousness, unusual. Up until this point, every year that Mitch McConnell has run to lead the Republican conference in the Senate, it's been a unanimous vote. This time, Senator Rick Scott, who led the Senate campaign arm for the senators, challenged him. And I think there was maybe 13 senators of Republicans who voted for him versus for Leader McConnell. What's that say about moving forward, and any thoughts you have about just basically history being made as well by the senator?
Yeah, it was 37-10.
Was it 10 votes? Okay.
And one profile in Courage who voted present. In a secret ballot election, they voted present. So,
do you know who it was?
I don't know. That's the great parlor game in Washington, is who voted present at the leadership meeting. But yeah, McConnell scored a victory, and it was kind of nasty, honestly. The operatives for McConnell and the operatives for Rick Scott sniping at each other in the press, and it was nasty. It's the first time he's really faced that kind of a public outcry. The result of it, though, is quite historic. By winning and by serving as the party leader, he will pass Mike Mansfield as the longest-serving party leader in U.S. history in January.
In the U.S. Senate.
In the United States Senate. And so it is quite a historic achievement. And for him, he's facing down two things in 2024. Obviously, the Republican primary for president. He and the former president are not on each other's Christmas card list at the moment. And obviously, the Senate map looks pretty good for Republicans in 2024. And so how he navigates the policy in Washington, but the politics of this 24 cycle might be among the most challenging of his career.
Consequentially, in terms of because we know that the best Republicans can do in this election, because there's still one more to be decided with the runoff in Georgia, is the status quo, basically 50-50 with Kamala Harris, the vice president, casting the deciding vote. Do you believe that if, in fact, though, Raphael Warnock wins and gives them that 51-49, do you think they go ahead and kill the legislative filibuster that they've been threatening about for a long time?
It will depend on whether they could find that extra vote. I think they lost 2 votes on it before.
Sinema and Manchin.
And it doesn't sound like Manchin is happy with his leaders right now. Sinema would be the one. So she's really kind of the key vote on that. But yeah, I do expect them to make another run at it, which is what makes the House majority, if you're a Republican, all that much more consequential, truthfully, because it would be your principal block on the White House.
On the House side, the majority for Republicans is kind of a mirror image of what it has been for Democrats the last couple of years, about 222
or so,
seats there. But perhaps for Kentucky, the biggest consequence of the Republicans taking the majority is you have a congressman whose district stretches from almost the entire state, is James Comer from Western Kentucky to Frankfort, but he is the incoming chairman of the Oversight Committee.
Yeah.
And you were going to see him a lot, even if those of you who've seen him a lot already on the cable news networks, you're going to be seeing him a lot more.
Yeah, Jamie Comer is about to be the most famous member of the House Republican Conference. He will have a cot at Fox News, and will be spending a lot of time there. And yesterday already had a press conference to begin to lay out his investigatory agenda against the Biden administration and against Hunter Biden. So it's interesting, actually. I think Kentucky has potentially its most consequential congressional delegation in history. Comer is in a really powerful position. Brett Guthrie from the 2nd District will be the chairman of the Health Subcommittee on Energy and Commerce, which all health policy flows through. Barr has become a senior member, Financial Services. Rogers remains one of the most, well, he's the dean of the House. And
longest serving.
And which carries in his seniority on the appropriations process. So Kentucky's, and then with McConnell, obviously, in the Senate, I mean, really, the delegation right now really punches above its weight. But Comer really stands to be a famous guy. I mean, he is going to be the tip of the investigation spear, and you're going to be seeing quite a lot of him.
He said yesterday in that news conference that, just to be clear, he said, yes, it's an investigation of Joe Biden, not Hunter Biden. But it has to do with basically how Hunter Biden's finances affected the president. We'll leave that for Newsmax and Fox News and CNN for a different time. I do want to make sure on our limited time, Scott, we talk about consequences of the election here in Kentucky.
Yeah.
So you went from, it was only, 6 years ago, the Democrats still had the majority in the Kentucky House, 56 seats.
Yeah.
And as a result of last week's election, Republicans went from 75 seats in the Kentucky House to 80. Now it's an 80-20 breakdown. I'm sure you all know this as politicos here in the room. What does this practically mean?
Well, back to Comer for a minute. It's interesting. You think back to that 2015 gubernatorial primary. You think about the personalities involved: Matt Bevin, Hal Heiner, Jamie Comer, who lost by Will T. Scott. Comer lost by 83 votes. But as it turns out, he's going to wind up being the most powerful and consequential out of the whole thing. It's funny how
he's the only one in office.
Yeah, he's the only one in office, and is going to be quite a famous guy. So it's interesting how life turns out. Just when you think everything's off the rails, it can get right back on it.
So really, then Hunter Biden would have, if he could turn back time,
he would have.
He would find 84 votes.
Yeah, he would have loved to have moved to Kentucky and voted for Comer. I'm sure he kept him here. On the Kentucky legislature, it was an interesting night. Obviously, Republicans advanced to 80 in the House and picked up 1 in the Senate. And it's really, I mean, it's really remarkable when you think about what's happened over the last 6 years in terms of the advance of the Republicans in Frankfurt, while at the same time having a Democrat governor.
Right.
And so all this is going to come to a head, obviously, in the governor's race next year. But it is, for those of us who have been involved in politics for the last 20 years, I mean, the idea of Republicans having 80 seats in the state legislature, I mean, it would have been unthinkable 2 decades ago.
So that's a supermajority in both. There's 31 Republicans of the 38 Senate seats and 80 of the 100 House seats. So it seems to me that, and we maybe have already seen some of this, there's an inevitable factionalism. Those groups can't be so large without being kind of broken up into other interests. How does that challenge Robert Stivers and David Osborne as the respective leaders of those two houses?
Yeah, I think some factionalism is to be expected, and it might be strange factions. I do think the urban-rural divide in the state continues to be a principal dividing line on a number of issues. And Republicans in this case, in this particular election, did elect some more members from Louisville, to maybe a few more urban members there. So whenever I try to think about how things are going to break down, that's the first place I look is the urban-rural split. But it does become a challenge when the other party becomes inconsequential, and you do have different worldviews inside your own conference. You do get some factionalism, and it doesn't mean gridlock, but it certainly it's a headache for those people who are in leadership.
The Republicans in the General Assembly have been pretty consistent the last several years, especially since taking control of both houses, that really tax reform, kind of a pro-business environment in the state really seems to be their priority. Do you expect that to continue to be their priorities moving forward?
I do. I don't expect a ton out of this session, truthfully. I don't expect, the speaker told me we shouldn't expect them to spend too much money. I do think also they're going to continue to look at changes to the tax code to go away from sales taxes and towards more consumption taxes. So that general fiscal outlook seems to be where they're headed. But I'm not expecting a ton of major sweeping change out of this session.
I'm sure most of you are already aware that because of the tax reform legislation, because of the certain thresholds were met, that the income tax in Kentucky as of January will be reduced from 5% to 4.5%, and then I think the vice chair of the budget committee, Brandon Reed, said that he expects the thresholds to be hit again the following year and to get to a 4% income tax in Kentucky. So Republicans would consider that to be a victory.
Yeah, absolutely, and they don't have to do anything to achieve it. They've already done it.
It's already passed.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. The governor, Andy Beshear, and his recent moves. Let's talk first of all about the marijuana, just because it's just happened this week. Medical marijuana by executive order, and the governor hosted a series, may have come to your communities, of kind of listening sessions on this issue. General Assembly has debated this, or at least it's been brought up. There's been plenty of committee hearings on this, and General Assembly has declined to act on this issue. And the governor said basically, because they won't, he will, and issued an executive order. We've heard from, and you're going to hear from Daniel Cameron, the Attorney General will be coming up here within this hour, I believe, and I expect he would say something about this. He's saying it's not legal, it's not constitutional. Even Jason Nemes, who's from Jefferson County, one of the proponents of the legislation in the House, said that the governor was inappropriate there. But has the governor really boxed in the General Assembly here? Because he says the people are on his side, and he's going to force them then to take action, perhaps, against something he considers to have the will of the people on his side.
Yeah, it's an interesting position. I think over the last few years, we've moved into an era of boundary pushing by chief executives on testing the limits of their authority. Certainly during COVID, I think many state governors did that. I think the President of the United States, Trump and Biden, have done that. And then that has spilled into other issues now. Biden, I think, may have exceeded his authority on the student debt plan, but same situation. Thought it was popular, decided to test it. Now Beshear's doing it on medical marijuana. So it feels like we're living through an age of people stretching their views of executive power and daring courts and other political authorities to stop them. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but it does put the Republicans in an interesting position of having to defend what they say is the law, while at the same time appearing to be on the wrong side of popular opinion. So it was quite an interesting turn for Beshear. I mean, I don't know if it's smart to break the law, but at the same time, as a political matter, the polling on it's pretty clear.
Andy Beshear's governorship was first defined by his response to COVID and steering the state through that situation, then by the twin disasters in western and then eastern Kentucky with the tornadoes and the floods, and now you have these issues coming up that he's bringing to the fore. Do you consider him to be the favorite and really has the odds on, if you will, to be able to win re-election?
Yeah, I do actually. I think incumbent governors are difficult to beat. Only one lost in this midterm, the governor of Nevada. And it was largely over COVID lockdowns. The governor out there did not fare well after what they did on COVID. Now, that's a state that's heavily dependent upon hospitality industry for its economy, of course, and so he suffered under that. But it was an incumbent-friendly environment, and in both the U.S. Senate and in governor's races. So yeah, I do actually. Beshear's in an interesting position. I think he's personally actually pretty popular. I think his party is pretty unpopular. And so the challenge in a race like that, in a state that's at a macro level moving away from you, but at a micro level moving toward you, is to try to extract partisan politics from the debate and make it more of a nonpartisan argument.
He even made the point in one particular legislation in 2022, this year, of saying this was not a bipartisan effort, this was a nonpartisan effort.
Yeah.
It was really interesting, and if you could see kind of the reason for that is that he's setting himself up to be a post-partisan governor.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, instinctively, I think he's onto something. I mean, if there's one thing I've learned since Trump and 2018, 2020, 2022, this is going to sound pretty technical, political science sort of idea, but there's something to just not being an a-hole. Like if you want to run for, you guys run for office. There's something to be said for not being an a-hole,
Are you suggesting that in recent history in Kentucky that we've had one?
Yeah, I am. and I think the governor benefited from that in 2019, and he learned from it. But I think if you look around the country in this election, that was the basic strategy of a lot of campaigns. And so that's how you extract sort of partisanship out of it. So I don't know. We'll see if it works out. Kentucky has been a trendsetter. In 2015, Bevin's victory foretold Trump. Mm-hmm. But in 2019, Bevin's loss may have also foretold Trump. And so I wonder what the 23 election in Kentucky will foretell about 2024.
Well, I asked about Governor Beshear being the favorite, and you think he is, as the power of incumbency and other factors.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Republicans. There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
You have, we mentioned, Matt Bevin. He hasn't announced, but he's certainly a name out there. You have Kelly Craft, Daniel Cameron, Mike Harmon, help me out. Eric Dieters. Savannah Maddox.
Yeah.
I'm missing, who else am I missing? Ryan Quarles, Agriculture Commissioner, certainly.
Keck.
Alan Keck, the mayor of Somerset,
Yeah.
has not announced, but there's been a lot of talk out there.
Yeah.
So
Large primary.
please tell Ryan that I didn't forget his name. Anyway, but so this is a crowded primary. How's this all? Can you handicap this for me?
Well, it's interesting because I actually think most of these people are generally well-liked people, and so they won't have that hanging around their neck should any of them get the nomination. This was the main problem with the 2019 election. All the Republicans won except one. And one of these things is not like the other. But I don't think they're going to suffer from that this time.
You don't think Matt Bevin will run for office again?
He could, but I don't.
Before I forget, a little recent rumor. I mentioned all the candidates, and Ryan Quarles is a good guy. I heard that.
I hope you guys are enjoying the Joe Arnold show, by the way.
Thank you. I have 2 fans. By the way, Scott and I also host a weekly podcast with 3 of our friends called Flyover Country with Scott Jennings, and you can hear more of the bashing of me by him every week on there. Papa John Schnatter.
Yeah, I heard that too.
You hear that rumor, anybody?
Yeah.
That he might jump in?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and we've got rid of the runoff, so and the threshold, so you could win with a very few number of votes.
Yeah.
And but that's not been great. I mean, if you look at some of these races that happened in 22, where Republicans got nominations with less than half the vote, they went on to have a really rough ride. The one that didn't was J.D. Vance in Ohio, although he ran like 20 points behind Mike DeWine up there. But Dr. Oz got in the 30s. Blake Masters got in the 30s. I mean, some of these people who lost after getting a low number of votes in a primary. So I don't know how it's going to turn out. And candidly, I think you could make an argument for a lot of these campaigns. I know Daniel's going to be here in a few minutes. I mean, he's a bona fide celebrity. Kelly Craft is one of the most unique kinds of candidates we've ever had, and certainly will have huge resources. Ryan Quarles is the most experienced guy in the field, and has probably the greatest courthouse and grassroots following out there among people who deal with governments at various levels. I mean, you could make a case for all these folks as being really strong options. I don't know how it's going to turn out. I think if you polled it today, I think Daniel would probably be ahead because he's the most famous. But the election ain't today, so I think it's going to be a pretty spirited race.
I want to ask you, I brought it up during the national election consequences and some of the Monday morning quarterbacking. So Donald Trump, you believe, was a drag on some Republican candidates.
Yeah.
You, I think, agreed with me that the Dobbs case and the abortion issue also was a factor in helping independents come to the way of the Democrats. Mm-hmm. So Daniel Cameron, who will be here in a minute, Attorney General, is perhaps the most, certainly the most high-profile pro-life official, because he's the one defending Kentucky's anti-abortion law, and he's endorsed by Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So considering what I just said about those factors, how does that factor in?
Yeah, good question. I mean, a year is a long time. I mean, we got a long way to go until the general election next year. I don't think any of us know what issues are going to be the most important. I still think, on balance, in Kentucky, having Trump's endorsement in a Republican primary is a good thing, and will help Daniel. But at the end of the day, I think most voters aren't waiting for other people to tell them which person should be governor of Kentucky. I think in order to get elected governor, you have to do it on your own steam. It's my view, and I think endorsements won't. Maybe it may help him in the primary. I just don't think it's going to matter that much in the general election. You have to make an argument beyond an endorsement, and I think he would. I think any of these people would. Just like Bashir is going to make an argument beyond, random endorsements. And but that's what sets good candidates apart. Is not. That's what some of this post-election carping about the Senate races. This guy that ran in Arizona, Masters, running around. This guy didn't do enough for me. This guy didn't do enough for me. This guy didn't. Just total whining. And the people who are successful aren't whiners. They go out and build their own identity and their own campaign. That's another lesson from this election: is can you build your own identity separate and apart from other things and other people? Mm-hmm. And that's the challenge for any of these folks that are taking on Bashir. He's built an identity, whether you like him or not. He's built an identity beyond just being a partisan Democrat or beyond just being the son of a governor. He's built an identity, and that's his brand, and that's what he's running on. So if I'm running one of these gubernatorial campaigns, that's what I'm thinking about. What kind of identity can I build that's beyond just an endorsement or just something superficial? And that's really the challenge of a campaign. It takes resources, takes a lot of focus, and we'll see who can do it.
It's not my show, as you've already pointed out. So as we wrap up here, what didn't I ask you? Anything other closing thoughts for this august body?
Oh gosh. Well, first of all, congratulations to all of you who are returning to office and for serving. Are there any county clerks here, by the way? Thank you all for what you do.
I will say on that note, because I'll be my show again, Scott. No, Michael Adams, Secretary of State. I don't know if he's been here or not as well. I just want to also shout out to him because he took grief by both sides, frankly, on some of those reforms. And as I watched those votes still being voted, or being counted a week later in Arizona, I kept thinking, thank God I'm in Kentucky. Yeah, we have great elections and great fair. Exactly. Yeah. So, congratulations.
It is actually pretty remarkable what we do here. It was remarkable what they did in Florida. I mean, some states have this figured out, and I think we're one of them, and I think we're a national leader on that. And so, I think as I watch all these folks out west struggle to count their ballots and so on and so forth, it's another reason to be thankful to be a Kentuckian. So, thank you all for what you did.
Thank you all very much.